All right, so Psalm 139, 23 to 24. Um, you've probably preached on it, but have you ever thought about it like as a call for like a spiritual workout?
Oh, wow.
That's just one of the unique takes that we are diving into today,
Okay.
along with a whole stack of sermon analyses from different churches,
Okay.
and all are focused on giving you fresh perspectives on this well-known passage.
I like it. Yeah. And it's amazing how even a familiar verse like this,
Yeah.
can yield new insights when you see how different pastors approach it.
Absolutely.
For example, Radiant Covenant Church's sermon on transformation through bold prayers.
Mm.
That one really digs deep into what it means to let God truly search us.
Yeah, and they actually suggest that it's the prayers that we shy away from, the ones that make us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that hold the key to real transformation.
Yeah.
It's like we ask God to search our hearts,
Mm-hmm.
but then we like try to hide in the corners.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
They use this analogy of a workout trainer, pushing you beyond your limits.
Huh.
You might be sore afterwards,
Right.
but that's how you know you're growing stronger.
Yeah.
And so spiritually, those uncomfortable moments, those offenses, as they call them,
Mm-hmm.
might be exactly what we need to expose the areas where we're holding back from God.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. And speaking of areas we might be hiding even from ourselves,
Ooh.
Hope on the Beach Church takes a hard look at self-deception in their sermon.
Okay.
And they don't just mention it. They list specific ways that we fool ourselves.
Okay.
Like that manic cheeriness we put on
Oh, yeah.
when we're actually hurting inside.
Mm-hmm.
Or that constant need for distraction, always avoiding quiet reflection because we might not like what we find.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's so relatable, though, and they tie it directly to Psalm 139, 23 to 24,
Okay.
arguing that the verse is an invitation to let God expose those hidden places.
But isn't that a bit scary, though? Letting God see all of our flaws and shortcomings.
Well, that's where the Orchard Church's sermon comes in.
Okay.
They focus on God's omniscience as a source of comfort,
Okay.
not fear.
Mm-hmm.
They argue that we need to trust God's knowledge more than our own often fleeting emotions.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, and they use a great illustration to drive that point home.
Okay.
A man who was incredibly proud of being briefly addressed by King George V.
Yeah.
The king didn't even do anything special, just told the guy to move.
Oh, wow.
But even that brief encounter with an earthly king made him feel important.
Mm-hmm.
Now imagine, they say, knowing the King of Kings.
Wow.
The one who knows you completely and still loves you unconditionally.
Okay, that is a powerful image.
Right.
But how do we translate that into a message our congregations can grasp?
That's a good question. I think it's about emphasizing the personal nature of God's knowledge.
Okay.
He doesn't just know facts about us. He knows our hearts, our deepest fears, our hopes,
Mm-hmm.
and that intimate knowledge makes his love even more profound. It's not about being watched or judged.
Yeah.
It's about being known and loved at a level we can barely fathom.
Okay, so moving from grand concepts to like a really tangible sermon illustration.
Okay.
Waymark Church uses this metaphor of a bottom plow.
Okay, I'm picturing it, that deep tilling action, turning the soil from the very bottom.
Yeah.
What's the connection to Psalm 139, 23 to 24?
They say that God does that with our hearts.
Hmm.
He unearths the roots of offense,
Wow.
the things buried deep down,
Yeah.
and brings them to the surface. It's not about smoothing things over. It's about getting to the root of the problem.
I like that.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that the speaker added this historical context, pointing out how agricultural imagery would have resonated so strongly with the psalmist's audience.
Right.
It adds this whole other layer of meaning connecting the ancient world with our modern understanding.
And Harvest Christian Ministries goes in a completely different direction with their sermon,
That's
using the analogy of God as a GPS, guiding us on the right path.
interesting.
I can already see this resonating with a lot of people.
It's brilliant because it speaks to that deep human desire for direction.
Right.
Especially in a world that can feel so chaotic.
Right.
It's like we're all a bit lost sometimes.
Yeah.
And we crave that reassurance that we're heading in the right direction.
Plus, it's such a visually engaging concept.
Yeah.
You can practically hear that GPS voice saying, recalculating. You've missed the turn towards forgiveness again.
Okay. I have to admit that made me chuckle.
Right.
But you're right. Humor can be a really effective tool
Mm.
for making these ideas stick.
Before we move on to some more quick insights from the sermons, I want to pause for a moment and let that GPS analogy sink in.
Okay.
Imagine using that in your next sermon on Psalm 139 23 to 24.
It's a powerful image. It reminds us that even when we stray,
Mm-hmm.
God is always there ready to recalculate and guide us back to the right path. But it also emphasizes our responsibility to pay attention to his directions and
Right.
make the choice to follow.
Exactly. It's not about passively letting God take the wheel.
Right.
It's about actively engaging with his guidance
Mm-hmm.
and making choices that align with his will,
Mm-hmm.
which brings us back to that idea of bold prayers we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
It's about being willing to take those spiritual detours,
Mm-hmm.
even when they lead us out of our comfort zones.
I like it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting how these different sermon approaches, with their unique analogies and illustrations, all point back to the core message of Psalm 139, 23 to 24, this idea of surrender and vulnerability before God.
Yeah. It's like we want God to know us, but only the good parts. We're afraid to show him the messy, the broken, the parts we'd rather keep hidden.
And that's where those bold prayers come and the ones Radiant Covenant Church talked about.
Mm.
It's about being willing to pray those scary prayers, the ones that expose our deepest fears and insecurities.
Yeah, they actually suggested that the things that we are most afraid to pray about
Mm.
might be the very areas where we need God's transforming power the most.
It's a challenging concept, but it makes you think, what if the key to unlocking spiritual breakthroughs lies in confronting those areas where we're holding back from God?
Yeah, it reminds me of something Hope on the Beach Church said about self-deception.
Mm-hmm.
They pointed out all these subtle ways we fool ourselves, like that tendency to jump from one distraction to the next, never really slowing down to face our true selves.
It's like we're afraid of what we might find if we actually stopped and listened to our hearts.
But Psalm 139, 23 to 24 is a call to stop running, to let God shine his light on those dark corners we'd rather keep hidden.
And that's where trust comes in.
Yeah.
Trusting that God's love is big enough to handle our mess, that his grace can cover even our deepest flaws. Remember that illustration from the Orchard Church about the man who was so proud of being spoken to by King George IV?
Yeah, even though the king barely acknowledged him.
But it made him feel important seen. Now imagine they said that feeling magnified 1,000,000 times over, knowing that the King of Kings, the creator of the universe, sees you, knows you, and loves you completely.
That's the kind of love that casts out fear, that gives us the courage to open ourselves up to God's scrutiny.
And that brings us back to the bottom plow metaphor from Waymark Church. God doesn't just want to skim the surface. He wants to go deep to unearth the roots of offense, the things that are holding us back from experiencing his fullness.
They even pointed out the historical context, reminding us that agricultural imagery would have been so powerful for the psalmist's audience. It's like we're not just reading words on a page, we're connecting with a lived experience that transcends time and culture.
Speaking of connecting, let's revisit that GPS analogy from Harvest Christian Ministries. It's such a brilliant way to illustrate God's guidance in our lives.
It's like we all have those moments where we feel lost and confused, desperate for some direction, and God is there like that trusty GPS saying, recalculating, I've got you.
But it's not just about passively following the directions. It's about actively engaging with God's guidance, making choices that align with his will, even when they take us off the beaten path.
And let's be honest, sometimes those detours lead to the most incredible discoveries.
Absolutely. It's often in those unexpected twists and turns that we experience the most profound growth and transformation.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to those quick hits we mentioned earlier. Those little nuggets of wisdom that popped up in multiple sermons.
Those are always gold. They give us a sense of what's resonating across different congregations.
Right. One that stood out was Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is deceitful above all things. It's a reminder that we need God's help to truly understand ourselves.
And it adds another layer to Psalm 139, 23 to 24. It's not just about God searching us. It's about us acknowledging our own capacity for self-deception and inviting him to reveal the truth.
Waymark Church brought up a great point about David's struggles with offense. Here's this man after God's own heart, and yet he messed up royally at times. It humanizes the message, reminding us that we're all works in progress, even the heroes of the faith. And to wrap up these quick insights, Radiant Covenant Church connected Psalm 139, 23 to 24 back to Matthew 6.21, where Jesus talks about our treasure being where our heart is.
Oh, yeah. That's a powerful connection. It's like they're saying, what are you holding on to so tightly that you're afraid to let God touch it?
Right.
It's a challenge to examine our priorities and see if they're truly aligned with God's will.
So many thought-provoking ideas to unpack from just these few sermons. I don't know about you,
Yeah.
but I'm already seeing Psalm 139, 23 to 24 in a whole new light.
Me too. It's amazing how these different pastors with their unique approaches and illustrations can breathe fresh life into a passage we thought we knew so well.
Right.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize there's always more to discover, always deeper layers of meaning to uncover.
Which is why this deep dive has been so valuable.
Absolutely.
It's given us a chance to step outside our usual interpretations and consider new perspectives, new ways of approaching this familiar verse.
And that's what we want to encourage you to do as well. Don't let the familiarity of Psalm 139, 23 to 24 make you complacent.
Yeah.
Keep exploring, keep digging deeper, keep asking God to reveal new insights.
Remember, it's not about finding the one right interpretation.
Right.
It's about discovering the truth that speaks to your heart, to your context, to the needs of your congregation.
And who knows, you might just stumble upon a fresh perspective that transforms not only your own understanding of this passage,
Right.
but also the way you share it with others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we conclude this deep dive, we
Yeah.
leave you with a final thought. What if we viewed Psalm 139, 23 to 24, not as a test, but as an invitation? An invitation to deeper intimacy with the God who knows us better than we know ourselves and loves us unconditionally.
It's a thought that challenges us to approach this passage not with fear, but with open hearts and a willingness to be truly known by the one who created us.
Yeah. And in that knowing, in that surrender, we might just discover the freedom and transformation we've been longing for.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Psalm 139, 23 to 24. We hope you've gained some fresh insights and are inspired to continue exploring the depths of this powerful passage.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep discovering, and keep diving deep into the riches of God's Word.